Now it's Boomer Life. Lifestyle ideas designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is Boomer Life with Sterling Fox.
Well, hello and welcome to Boomer Life here on AM 650. Glad to have you along with us as today we're joined in studio by two of the team from Integrative Naturopathic Medical Center in Vancouver in the persons of Dr. Larry Chan and Dr. Alex Chan. Dr. Larry, welcome. Good to see you again.
Glad to be here.
It's nice to have you back with us. And Dr. Alex, nice to see you too. It's been a while since you visited us.
It has been. Thank you.
Now, tell us a little bit about Integrative Naturopathic Medical Center. Now, you've been doing this on Boomer Life long enough to have actually gone through a name change. Larry, when we first met you and your two teammates, the original founders of what at the time was Integrative Healing Arts, and since has become Integrative Naturopathic Medical Center. Why did you go through the process of the name change? What was the point?
I still trip on that name. I still use Integrative Healing Arts still, but I think it's just more show that we're medically oriented. We have a lot to do with integration of medicines, and it's a little bit more up to date, and it shows our broadness of services.
Well, tell us, obviously it's a medical team. Tell us about your medical credentials, and then we'll get to your daughter here in just a moment.
Well, our team has many different people on the team itself. We have naturopaths, chiropractors. We have a medical doctor that comes in as well and helps us out. We have nutritionists. We have massage therapists. What else do we have?
I think that's a complete dispensary that sells different pharmacy items and botanicals, as well as
Complete
laboratory facilities. So.
Right. Now, you started out, what's your first degree as in chiropractic, Dr. Larry? And then, because you have multiple credentials. You've got acupuncture and multiple credentials. Tell us about yourself.
Right. We also have Chinese medicine and acupuncture as well. I started as a chiropractor, DC, and did that for about 10 years. And it wasn't enough, so we added the naturopathic component, and then we went back and added Chinese medicine and acupuncture as well. It just gives us a little bit more facility to treat difficult cases. And my partners and myself, we all went for that extra training.
Well, and also in studio with us, Dr. Alex Chan, same last name, same family. Alex, growing up with the doctor in the family, was it something you always wanted to do too, or did you just sort of stumble onto it by accident? Tell us about you and why you ended up working with your dad.
So for myself, it's a little bit of an interesting story. For a lot of people, as far as their journey towards, I guess, complementary alternative care, it takes them a while to discover that, whereas I was born into it.
Of course,
that was what was natural to me.
Right.
So it was something that I was always interested in. My mother's also a massage therapist, so on both sides of the family, I really have that
you didn't stand a chance, did you?
No, not really. So I thought about conventional medical school at one point and knew I was interested in medicine, knew that I really appreciated that connection that people have with their physician, and also that relationship is such an honor to be a part of. And so eventually ended up coming around to the fact that, it really was a better fit for me to want to do naturopathic medicine, because it really is important, that preventative piece, and I know that's something we're going to talk about a lot today.
Sure, yeah.
So knew that there was a way for me to go about it. I always feel like my naturopathic doctorate alone is a little bit pales in comparison to my father's degrees, but
well, he's tough to keep up with.
He is, but since I've been very happy to join the clinic about 2 years ago now and be under an actual residency program in our clinic, and so I've been able to study both with my dad as well as his two partners, and so they bring, cumulatively 90 years of experience for my benefit.
Interesting stuff. Now, the two Chans, Doctors Larry and Alex, are the leading duo at Integrative Naturopathic Medical Center's cancer treatment team. Dr. Larry, tell us why, what you do, because you've outlined a number of services offered by Integrative, but you specialize, particularly you and Alex specialize in working with cancer patients. So tell us about what you do.
In the 30-year history of Integrative Healing Arts and now Integrative Naturopathic Medicine Center, we treated a lot of cancer cases over the years. And what Alex brings to us is she brings a much more updated viewpoint of the latest research,
Sure.
latest technologies that are there available, especially some of the intravenous technologies that are there. So what we really want to do with both of us is that we want to bring the entire services of the natural approach and integrative approach to treating this difficult issue of cancer.
Right.
And really, it's about helping the patient individually see a bigger picture of the healing process and not just dealing with them as a disease entity of cancer itself.
Well, it's difficult to even, when we were talking before my anticipation of the show, it's difficult to get yourself up for a conversation about cancer, Alex, because it's just such a scary thing and it has such ultra negative connotations. But cancer, if there's one thing we need to do as a Canadian group, is talk more about cancer, because we just need to know more, first and foremost, don't we?
We really need to talk about the dreaded C word.
Absolutely.
And somewhat beginning that conversation almost takes away some of the power and the fear, because there's a lot of fear-based decisions that people end up making, and people end up feeling really trapped, and that's not a conducive state to healing or helping to battle any sort of illness,
Right.
let alone cancer.
Right. Is it truly, Larry, as fearful? Are we right to be as fearful as Alex suggests we all are when it comes to cancer? Is it still a deadly condition?
Anytime you deal with something that, a condition that can take your life, is of course going to be the scariest thing we deal with.
Sure.
And that's why there's so much hype and fear around it, and for good reason, because going right back, I mean, we all hear about the C word, and back in the 60s when Nixon first declared war on cancer, it was probably one out of four people had cancer at that time.
Okay.
And
I actually remember Tricky Dick declaring war on cancer, and at the time going, well, that's kind of an almost noble thing to do, recognizing that it was starting to really be a force to be reckoned with. And he arranged for what, $100 billion or something to be.
At that time, it was not that much money, but it turned out to be easily over $100 billion.
Okay, all right.
But at that time, it was really allocating a lot of government resources and research grants to finding a cure to cancer as a whole.
Right, I remember all this.
And one out of four people potentially would have cancer at that time in the United States. Heavy allocation of resources for that. And now, 40, 50 years later, it's one out of three people will have cancer.
So even though we've spent over $100 billion and devoted over 40 years of pretty intense research to this problem, it's now even more prevalent than it was in the late 1960s.
And back in the 60s, they thought that within 2 decades we'll have a cure.
And it's moving closer and closer from that, one out of every three, which is really mom, dad, and one child.
Right.
One out of that three family is moving closer to one out of every two. So really, in most every family, you have someone who not only has cancer or has had cancer, but also can die from cancer.
Well, and that's certainly something the Cancer Society people use as a vehicle to generate funds, don't they? They say it's unlikely there's anyone alive in Canada who isn't in some way touched by cancer.
Definitely.
And they're right. But at the same time, I think I find a lot of enthusiasm for cancer treatments. It can be suggesting in a strange way, Alex, that it's better than we think it is. And you're suggesting the hard truth is, as your dad just also said, it's worse than it was 40 years ago.
It is, and it really is moving that way, which I think begs the question of, don't we need a change? Don't we need a different perspective? And not to say that the research is bad, because it isn't at all, but we need to have other ways of looking at this illness to be able to look foremostly at prevention and early diagnosis, because really that's one of the things that gets forgotten about, is that, yes, late stage cancer, there is things you can do about it, but a lot of the tools that people have, they don't even realize that cancer isn't something that happens overnight.
Right,
it's
sure.
A decade-long process. It's an entire lifestyle that gets you to that point. Not that I'm saying that the blame is on the patient, but more so that patients are empowered with the fact that they have things that they can do before they even reach that point of having to be told, you have cancer.
Back to the money for a second, if you don't mind, Dr. Larry. I mean, really, over $100 billion over 40 years, and we're actually further behind where we were when we started off in earnest 40 years ago? That's not very good bang for the buck. What went wrong?
Well, good research has happened, but really what happens is that we have an aging population, and we have an environment that's been really degraded over the last 40 years. There's more chemicals and pesticides in the air, more aberration of our food chain as well.
Okay.
And more toxins there. And there's so many chemicals and toxins that we have to deal with on a daily basis. Our bodies really break down based upon that. So all those factors really create a rich environment for our bodies to be degenerative. And cancer is one of the major degenerative diseases that are there. And that's really what the frightening thing is. So yes, we made some progress, but we've gone backwards a lot because the environment is breaking down.
Well, if the environment, the degradation of the environment over the last 40 years is a major factor in contributing to the increase of cancer in North Americans, Dr. Alex, what then how do we get around that? Because I think people are a little, they're concerned by that. The numbers are staggering. And
Western lifestyle doesn't help because, if you look at a lot of the other sort of cultural biases, something like breast cancer is a lot less common in the Asian population from Asia. But if you look at immigrants coming to the West, to North America, we'll see that within, I believe it's over a 10-year span of time of them being exposed to sort of Western culture, Western diet.
Suddenly their risk goes up?
80%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so with the environment in mind, though, what percentage of cancers are caused by the environment versus one's genetic predisposition? My mom had cancer, so it's likely I will too. What are the numbers there, Alex?
Right, and people really think that genetics plays that huge part.
Yeah.
Which it does play a part, but the thing that we forget is that the makeup of what happens, what we call in science is the phenotype, is really a product of the genetics or the genotype and the environment. And with cancer, the environment plays a huge role, probably at least 80 to 90, 95% in some cases.
Oh, is that right?
Of actually shaping what actually happens, whether you develop cancer or not. And we see that in a lot of twin studies that they do, that because one twin gets cancer doesn't mean that the other twin will, unless they've had almost the same exposures. Mm-hmm. So really, that environmental piece is playing a role in every single cancer diagnosis.
Interesting. Well, if those are the real numbers, Dr. Larry, and the genetic component is, say, 10%. Well, then what are the other factors? Then is it 90% environment? And if that's the case, what percentage of cancer is in fact preventable with greater knowledge of the environment?
And in the whole push towards finding a cure for cancer, one thing at that time was a very simplistic approach. We must find a common reason why cancer occurs.
Right.
Maybe it's a bug,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's this, whatever, an oncogene that causes it. It really isn't. It's a very complex, multifactorial issue. Lifestyle and environment, as Alex just mentioned, is a big part of that. And to the point where now they realize that even a conservative agency like the United States National Health Institute has come out and said 75% of cancers are environmentally related and can be prevented.
75%.
Yeah. That's
wow.
what they've admitted to lifestyle and environment. So we kind of look at in answer to your question, our genetics is 5 or 10% cause. It's like loading the gun, and the pulling of the trigger is the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And how you react and how we deal with the environment in our bodies is key. What are our exposure factors? And some of those exposure factors and triggers for cancer, therefore, are very preventable. Going back to that. And some of the things we'll carry on with is that typical thing that we don't think about is heavy metal toxicity. What is that? So how many of us have mercury amalgams and silver amalgams in our mouth? Fillings.
Sure, fillings from
our generation, the boomer generation.
That's what we all got mercury fillings, didn't we?
It was drill and fill dentistry back then.
Yeah, you bet.
And we know that a typical filling, a silver filling, is actually 50% mercury, plus cadmium and nickel. All those are toxic minerals and metals. They're in their mouth, and they're highly genetic damaging. They damage genes, and that's what cancer is about, is having genetic damage.
So should old people like, us boomers, go back to the dentist and say, listen, in my next checkup, why don't you go through and identify any of those old school fillings still left, and we'll start to replace them.
Good idea.
Is that a good strategy?
Very good strategy. There's ways of extracting it that helps as well, because when you extract it, you're creating more mist and more vaporization of the metals that can be ingested into the body more. But there's also leakage that occurs. So yes, it's a very good idea to remove them.
Interesting.
And remove them properly is important.
And
you
how
definitely
many?
don't get any more. And
Right,
that's one
right.
of the crazy things. You know, in Europe, they're not really doing any mercury amalgams anymore. But in North America, some dentists will still do that.
And that's a choice thing on their part, isn't it?
It is.
But I would imagine there are governing bodies in dentistry in Europe that have said, don't use that anymore, period, full
true.
stop. So what's the problem with North America?
Again, food politics, who knows what that is. But
Oh,
it's
okay.
unfortunate. Now, the other thing is food. That's why there's a whole organic movement of organic food.
Sure.
And it makes sense. And it's not just, the crazy vegetarians that talk about that. It's actually, in fact, vegetarians eating more organic foods have something like a 75% reduction in cancer risk.
Because we are what we eat. It really is.
It's just that simple,
It
isn't
is,
it?
yes.
You know, and we like to think of ourselves as incredibly complex persons, and we are physically, but there are some things that are just truisms that have been that way for thousands of years.
And we get a lot more exposure through sort of low quality meat through that is pumped full of growth hormones.
Sure,
and
sure.
we talk about how things like breast cancer and various sort of sex hormone driven cancers, how they're affected by estrogens and things that look like estrogens and that type of thing. And we know that a lot of the growth hormones that end up making the cows nice and big and
Right.
plump and all of that are actually very, very what's called phytoestrogenic. They feed those same receptors that can be stimulated to cause more cancer growth. So really a lot of that dietary component does make a big difference. And we know that Western society tends to eat a lot more meat, saturated fat,
Sure.
that type of thing.
Okay, we'll take a quick break here. It's Boomer Life, and we're joined in studio by the professionals from Integrative Naturopathic Medical Center, Doctors Larry and Alex Chan in studio. The subject is cancer, and it's an important conversation to have, and we hope very much that you'll stick around and join us when we return after this quick timeout.
Canada's only weekly radio show dedicated to the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on AM 650.